There we go. Yeah, so this is all about the Rural Active Travel Toolkit. I'm aware of time is quite tight, so I'm gonna try and keep it as quick as possible. But essentially, we're going to go through what is kind of included in this toolkit. I know Michelle's sent it out to you, so you can read it a bit more in depth. And then I'll talk a bit about sort of the feedback, because ultimately that's the main purpose of me being here at the moment, is to kind of get that sort of consultation and your feedback on what you think is good in the toolkit and what you think could be added, whether you think it's too much detail. But yeah, I will try not to ramble too much. So just a quick bit of background around the toolkit. So the main purpose of this, and I think it's already come across quite a lot in this meeting, is the council is really keen to kind of increase active travel in rural areas. And we're sort of thinking about how we can do that with the constraints that we've got, and we've touched on them already. So this toolkit is essentially to try and encourage communities, local groups, organisations to think about sort of funding and constructing and doing their own rural active travel schemes in their local area. And so this toolkit kind of goes through all of the essential stuff they need to consider, and how they can sort of start thinking about these schemes. And ultimately, yeah, we just want to improve access to active travel schemes in rural areas. And the toolkit will be online, and it will be something which hopefully can be updated quite a lot if things need to be updated. And then in terms of like who's that for, as I've kind of mentioned, it's basically for anybody interested in boosting active travel locally. And that includes parish councils, community groups, landowners, individuals, small town councils, organisations, charities, stuff like that. And something to sort of bear in mind, particularly when you're reading the document, is obviously everyone on this call is experienced and very familiar with active travel and delivering active travel schemes. But it's this toolkit and the balance we were trying to find was making sure it's accessible and people who don't have that experience are able to use it, and not get bogged down too much in some of the more complicated details. So it's about trying to find that balance. So yeah, I just quickly in terms of the role of some of their councils, as always already been mentioned, there is obviously capacity issues, and that's unfortunately just the reality of the situation. But my role, for those who weren't on the call, is Rural Active Travel and Engagement Officer. And so I'm going to be here as kind of almost like a bridge to give support to local communities, to try and bridge that gap, I guess, between internal teams and external teams. But ultimately, this is about empowering communities. And I do think there is a positive spin on that in terms of having these local active travel schemes, can really foster that sense of ownership, and they reflect the need of their local area, often better than the top down approach. So there is benefits to that, but my role is really gonna, in the future, when the scheme is when the toolkit is published, will be kind of working with these groups to try and support them in any way I can. I think I've covered everything, Stuart. So I don't know if you want to just go a bit into the journey so far.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tom. So you may be aware that this work started probably sort of back in the summer of 2025 when I was initially in post. Since then, we recognised through feedback and good communications with Councillor Wyke and Wilkins that there was this real need for support in rural areas, and especially looking at rural active travel. And as a result, the active travel engagement officer role was formed for Tom to step into. And part of that role, as Tom's mentioned, was this toolkit. So back in the summer, lots of internal consultations and workshops were taken on board. It's mainly my role at that time to lead on some of that work. So we spoke to teams such as like the policy teams, highways, public right-of-way, road safety and design team, to try to gain as much insight as we can around what are the key implementations that people need to know about when it comes to active travel, especially in rural areas. So we spent quite a bit of time actually having those consultations and that workshops internally to be able to get the toolkit into a position that it is at the moment. Moving forward from that, we had sort of regular check-ins with senior leaders. So we updated Councillor Wyke and some of the senior leadership team within transportation as well, in order to make sure that we were still on the right path and they were happy with that. And then we've tried to align it as well to some of the external areas as well. So already, I know Alan's mentioned the Explore National Park rural guidance. There's also the Active Travel England rural guidance as well, the draft version that has been shared. And there will be, hopefully, this year, the confirmation of that final version as well. And then speaking, as I mentioned, with the public right-of-way team as well, because we've sort of linked in really closely with them. So that's taken us up till pretty much now, really, where we've got it in presentable form for you to be able to have a look at. And as lots of you have been asking about in terms of feeding into the council, this is like a really great opportunity, we hope, and it shows willingness for us to want to hear views of the LCN Active Travel Group especially, and how you can help us to provide a little bit of consultation. So that's sort of where we are now at the moment with the toolkit and the journey that it's been on so far. So Tom, I don't know if you want to add anything else or if you're happy to move on.
No, thanks to it. Yeah, so just to go into sort of the layout and the content of the toolkit, I'm going to keep it quite brief, but essentially there were 5 sections: engagement, funding, route options and design, and consent, and then sort of turning plans into reality. The way it's kind of laid out is very much a process so that people can follow it along if they wanted to go from start to bottom. But I think it's worth noting that obviously every active travel scheme is different, so they don't necessarily need to go through all of those different sections, particularly if it's not an active travel scheme involving a route. The route options bit is not relevant. So just quickly to go through each section, so the engagement and building support section, that's very much talking about how you can set up your project for future success, the way I see it. Talking to your local community, engaging with trying to understand what they want, and then building that evidence base. And that really helps to kind of have those networks and that evidence in place if they were to apply for funding, they could say that they've had these conversations, they've engaged in these surveys, they've done this traffic count. Just to quickly go through what kind of included in those sections, as I mentioned, kind of how to develop a survey, the different methods, whether that's focus groups or online tools. Then kind of discusses about how to kind of build that evidence base and doing the counting, and also using some of that historical evidence, which is often in place, whether that's through neighbourhood plans and things like that. And then the second part is very much talking about how to kind of create a strong network, which is often very kind of useful in terms of knowledge sharing and using those links. So, talking to parish councils, they could talk to their councillor and engage with other groups. And again, that's very much kind of building that strong starting point and being able to use those connections as the project kind of progresses on. And there's also a bit about engaging landowners, and this kind of is throughout the document, but having that early kind of engagement and that flexibility and sort of a collaborative approach, I think, is to it.
Yeah. So the next section was around funding options. So we really wanted to highlight the importance of just being clear with how you may go about funding. It's really about estimating project costs. So whether it's a large project or a small project, how you may go about that, just so providing some key ideas and how you go around supporting the process that you may want to go through. So we've provided a little bit of information in there. Tom, if you slide on to the next one. So just some different things that you may want to consider when it comes to the journey of your own schemes. So these are all just little bits of information that are highlighted within the toolkit. But we don't need to go into too much detail around them because obviously conscious of time as well. And then it does touch on different ways that further away from funding that you may want to consider as well. So how we might engage with local events, business sponsorships and crowdfunding and those types of areas where we might be able to gather some funds, some precious money to be able to help support delivery of a project or a scheme.
Yeah, and then the next section is very much focused on kind of route design and options. Obviously, as I mentioned, that's not always necessary for active travel scheme, depending what the scheme is. And we're very conscious of that. But obviously, we wanted to include a bit more in depth about route options. Yeah, it kind of talks a bit about identifying how to identify land ownership, the different kind of route creation methods, then sort of defining the route type, and in terms of access, that again is important to sort of talk with the local community and trying to understand the what the community really wants. And then I know it's been sort of briefly spoken about sort of those more innovative ideas which are more kind of relevant to rural areas like quiet lanes and green lanes. And obviously there's a kind of very new to Somerset, as sort of already been mentioned. And then just kind of going into the design stuff, and in terms of ensuring that kind of where there is need to follow national standards, or how you go about that, making sure that you use design, you can use design consultants, and it kind of explains a bit, how you might want to do that. And it does sort of mention some of the more kind of future planning side of things in terms of, making your route or the travel scheme more attractive to you. Some of that's public art, biodiversity. Yeah, this is very much this section kind of gets into the sort of the nitty gritty around what the actual outcome is going to look like. Stuart?
Yeah, so moving on, one of the section focuses around consent. We're aware one of the areas that was brought up quite a bit in some of the workshops internally with some teams is around making sure that the correct consent was gathered in terms of building any active travel routes or any active travel schemes. So this focuses quite heavily on around the different types of consent you may want to consider. So yeah, it looks at a whole host of different things and how you can go about that as well, not least land ownership. And I know people have touched on that, and we'll have like a huge amount of experience in this room around being flexible with land ownership and making sure that we're trying to find that compromise when it does to come to route optioneering as well. But there's other consents that I'm sure you'll all be aware of, but that we need to make sure that we do highlight for any active travel schemes as well. So that's notified of in there.
Yeah, and then just very briefly on the sort of final section, this is very much kind of, right at the end, constructing, choosing the contractor, planning then for the maintenance and repair, which is obviously a very crucial kind of part of the project, and then ultimately kind of promoting and celebrating the success once it's kind of finished and done. Yeah, so it goes into various sort of pieces around there. I won't kind of go into too much detail. And then kind of moving on from that, I guess something which I'm really keen to mention in this group is the sort of, I don't know, there's already kind of a lot of knowledge sharing going on within this group. But something I'm really kind of interested in, and I think would be great, would be to kind of get that knowledge sharing outside of this group and with newer groups who might be interested in sort of developing their own schemes, and yeah, just try and sort of reduce some of those barriers and support that active travel delivery, because there's already great examples of community delivery schemes across Somerset. And just if you are kind of interested in that and you have some thoughts and ideas, then this is the feedback form basically. And there is a question which typically asks about that. So I'd just be interested to sort of hear your thoughts. So this feedback form basically is split into the same sections as the PowerPoint and the toolkit. Asks various questions. And yeah, you don't have to use that QR code. I'm sure we'll send a link, and we'll be keeping that open until the 22nd of December. I would like to just make a point that this toolkit is currently like a draft. So it does look very text heavy, but ultimately it will go through design. And our sort of future steps was after this sort of feedback, going into the new year, obviously sort of edits made. There might be an opportunity for sort of me to come back and kind of discuss some of that feedback with this group, and share some of what that kind of feedback said. And then going on, onwards into the new year, kind of going through that design process, and then hopefully kind of around springtime we can start thinking about the publication.
Okay.